Hi, I'm Pat Mullen from POV Magazine. Today I'm speaking with Eric Bauza, host of the documentary series Stay Tuned. Stay Tuned is a six-part doc that explores the world of animation. Each episode unpacks the art form to ask how animation shapes our relationship with the world from an early age. Bauza joins talking heads like Turning Red director Domee and Indy Stevenson, the creator of She-Ra, to unpack aspects of representation in animation like race, sexuality, and queerness, but also things like the role of villains and the commercialization of the art form. Bauza has voiced numerous beloved characters in animation, including Bugs Bunny and Daffy Duck, and he recently won an Emmy for his voice work on Looney Tunes. Bauza joined me via Zoom to discuss Stay Tuned and the state of animation. Now, if you'd like to read interviews, we have an edited version of this conversation on povmagazine.com, but for those of you who like to watch, what follows is our conversation in full. And if you're interested in seeing more, Stay Tuned is now streaming on CBC Gem.
It's interesting growing up watching cartoons, whether these messages or themes were in your face or buried beneath the surface. It's interesting to like look back and just examine like what was the norm. And again, what I love so much about this show is that there's a bright outlook of the future of how it exists and how it maneuvers through animation.
Mm. And like, what were some of your favorite animated series growing up? And what did you sort of see? How did you see them differently while looking back?
Oh man, well, of course I was born in the 80s, so I was a victim of the capitalism episode. And I'll tell you how much that works in my everyday living now as an actor because, it worked. Clearly, whatever they did worked. I bought every one of those. Well, not sorry. My parents bought every one of those Transformers. And actually, I remember working at the CN Tower. And I took my 6-year-old son there last night to check out CN Tower. I worked there in the mid 90s. After high school through college, and I traded my cousin his collection of original Generation 1 Transformers for CN Tower tickets. And to him, that was a fair trade. And I guess he knows that I'm taking good care of these original Transformers, but, years later, their Hasbro is re-releasing the exact same toys in the original 80s packaging, and even though I have the original Generation 1 toys there, I'm like, oh, like it still gets me. Nostalgia and capitalism is a bad combination. And as a voice actor, having voiced Drift, who is an Autobot on Transformers, it's even worse because now I'm collecting things that I've done voices on, and it is a vicious and endless cycle, unfortunately. That is what I'm learning through my bank account the hard way.
But what is it like for your kids, like, and having their dad be like Bugs Bunny and all these characters?
Oh man, well, it's funny because my son, I got one boy, 6 years old. He knows when it's Mel Blanc doing Bugs, and he knows when it's Dad doing Bugs. And whenever we're in the schoolyard, he like waves me over. He's like, "Hey, Dad, come over here," in front of his friends. He's do the voice. I'm like, "Hey, what's up, Doc?" And he's like, "Okay, go away. That's all we need. That's all we need." Yeah, he's like my little manager.
Hmm. And how did you choose which shows to represent in the discussions? Like, was it a matter of um, who was available like for interviews, or were like there key things that you saw as like cornerstones in the conversation?
Yeah, I mean, I think we just lucked out. We managed to get ND Stevenson, who is the showrunner of the She-Ra reboot. I wish that we also had someone who represented She-Ra from back in the day, but we basically still had the show to examine. If we didn't have an expert or someone representing the show from its original form, we still had experts who could analyze and tell us and break down like what exactly was happening during that era. And then, of course, having someone that represents the current version of the show, because as I said, nostalgia and reboots are something that won't cost big companies like DreamWorks or whoever owns the intellectual property rights to recreate a show versus creating an original show from scratch. They're not taking like a lot of chances. But what they are doing, again, are concentrating on telling new stories with classic characters, but with more realistic relationships and situations and care. Even when it comes down to the design, you look at something like She-Ra. I mean, back in the 80s, which was everyone was almost like cookie cutter, same shape. And Nowadays, if you look at a show, people, there's a variety of body types and there's a variety of, when it comes to design, there's just more variety and more real. Even though it's a cartoon, it's kind of grounded in some kind of reality. So it's a bit refreshing to know that the expectations for our kids, even as a kid absorbing that, you're not going to feel like, well, now I'm seeing Shira or He-Man, I have to have the giant, biceps and the abs to be this hero. Now it's like they're taking more realistic approaches to it, which is, I think, very refreshing.
Hmm. And was there a series or film where you really first saw yourself represented on screen, or ones where you really noticed like an absence of representation?
Oh yeah, well, if we're talking about like film, definitely The Goonies, and definitely Short Round. Well, not Short Round, but Data from Goonies. He's like one of the only representatives of an Asian kid in any kind of like film, and that's kind of like where I saw myself. In cartoons, it was a little bit harder to find. And to be perfectly honest, we cover it in the racism episode where it's like, I'm the sixth person to voice Bugs Bunny, and as we know, Bugs Bunny was created in the 40s, and what was happening in the 1940s was a different time. And the United States was at war with Japan, and they were depicted in some cartoons in some areas of like propaganda cartoons as like the enemy. And I know that was probably, again, just a flash in the pan sign of the times of what was happening then, but they probably didn't think that those cartoons that depicted certain cultures and races in a bad light would be on YouTube in 2022. You know what I mean? They were made to be shown in theaters as one-off cartoons. Um, but here we are, 2022. I'm hosting a show that kind of stares at these issues dead on in right in the face, and I think it's good to talk about it and examine it and learn from it, as opposed to sweep it under the rug. Because I think that's the only way we're going to learn and evolve from where we were to where we're going.
Hmm. And I know, like in the episodes I saw, they looked a lot at like character representation on screen. How do you feel the representation is for the voice actors? Because I know you talk about the Apu character, and
Hmm.
there was the documentary about him a few years ago.
Hmm.
Um, like, has much actually changed in the industry in terms of who's voicing the characters?
Yeah, I'm gonna say that now more than ever, we're looking towards you know, representation in a more accurate sense. We want authenticity, and especially it's strange because when I started voiceover, the most appealing thing about it was it didn't matter what you look like, right? It only mattered that you could act in a certain way, that you could act the part. But that also kind of meant it could be closing off opportunities for certain groups, minority groups, uh, as we saw in The Simpsons, where it was pretty much like whoever's in the room do that voice, rather than. I'm sure it was more of like a budget thing, whereas oh, we need to hire a person of that ethnicity. It might cost like an extra paycheck. Why don't we just have, because in voice acting, it's you get three voices for the price of one. And as soon as you voice a fourth character, that's when they have to start paying you a bit more.
Oh,
Yeah, so it could have literally just been a budget thing. They probably weren't even thinking that it was going to be offensive or racist. But because I'm sure Hank Azaria is not a racist, but the fact that he's putting on this voice culturally that he is not actually a part of, nowadays that is considered walking the line.
hmm.
um and I think it levels the playing field, whereas there aren't a lot of roles of minorities out there that they should be auditioning people of that race to represent at the very least, because there's not enough to go around for I don't remember the last time there was a Filipino character as the lead. And actually, I'm under NDA, even though I've never booked the role. There are a couple roles that I've read for recently where I'm like, halfway through the script, I didn't even realize that this was a Filipino character until they started talking Tagalog, the native Filipino
Oh.
language. I almost cried because I was like, "Oh my God, this is a Filipino character, like in a main role, like for a Disney cartoon, for a Nickelodeon show." I was very impressed and very happy. Um, at moments like that. But yeah, you want that level of authenticity. You want that genuine uh if it's a very specific story, if you're going to go there, you better make sure that whoever is behind the microphone or behind the pen writing the story has some kind of anchor into that. It's not to say that only, if there's a story about Filipinos, that only Filipinos can write about it, but at least some person in the room should be representative, I think, there to be that authenticity checkpoint for the story.
Mhm. Well, and sort of in that sense, like the series touches on a lot of um, mature themes and stories that people read in shows and films throughout their lives. Um, but when you mentioned Disney, like a few weeks ago, the former CEO Bob Chapek kind of got into hot water when he said that animation is just kid stuff. Made
Right,
some comment that like after putting the kids to bed, no grown up wants to watch a cartoon. How do you
right.
feel about that? And like, how does that sort of attitude that animation is not
It's
for everyone
it
shapes what
is
you see?
it's funny, from corporation to corporation, animation has always been seen as like, the afterthought, kind of like it's just cartoons, exactly as you said. Even though we see year after year, box office dollars after box office dollars, downloads after downloads, DVD purchase after DVD purchase, it's still an important part of your life as an adult, especially now with adult animation. If anything, I was just at the Toronto Animation Festival, and I made a statement saying, "Look, like where I work in kids' cartoons, a lot of it has a lot to do with intellectual property rebooting itself, which is fine, you know."
I'm very honored to be Bugs Bunny's voice doc. Don't get me wrong. Trust me, I love voicing Daffy.
But it seems to be that in adult animation, that's the only place these days where they don't mind taking a risk on original ideas and original stories. And I think that's fascinating that, like, adult cartoons, like 18 and up, like a Rick and Morty or a Family Guy, even, or, still even The Simpsons, or just any other original attempts at storytelling, adult animation seems to be the only place where they're, yeah, give us the next new idea
Mhm.
versus we don't want to see an adult version of like a kid's cartoon. Like no matter how good it is, we would still rather see an original adult, TV show, like from an original idea. I
Mhm.
just think that that's so crazy. And I applaud it. And, that's just some advice for the young future creators out there is like, hey, you might want to have that one adult idea in your back pocket because that one might end up going the distance versus like the 12th remake of Ninja Turtles. It's kind of crazy to think about that, but it just shows to me that cartoons are still definitely for the big kid or for the adults, because if they weren't, we wouldn't have like those adult animation blocks on television.
Mhm. And I remember, back in the day, like the original Ren and Stimpy was such a kind of like a not a taboo, but I think because I was so young and there was this whole like, oh, you can't watch that.
Okay, yeah.
Uh,
That was your household?
oh yeah, so yeah, yeah. And like Family Guy, King of the Hill being
Sure.
really controversial.
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
how does sort of working in animation and also being a parent, um, like, is there any relationship between the roles you choose and what you like watch with your kids? If it makes
Definitely. I
sense.
know that there's, it's funny how TV was just, it was there. It was, on. It was, turn the TV on. You're a parent. You're going to go upstairs and make your after school or your actual dinner for your kids and then, eat, do your homework, go to bed. Whereas a parent now, it's like, oh my gosh, you have to make sure that whatever they're watching on YouTube is not gonna. You could start on something friendly on regular YouTube, and then it goes down this rabbit hole of, hey, we weren't watching this 5 minutes ago. How did you get to this video? So now on my son's iPad, I got to make sure he's watching YouTube Kids. It's funny. He likes, the regular preschool type programming, or programming appropriate for his age at 6 years old. And I trust YouTube Kids not to go down like that rabbit hole of darkness. Um, and Yeah, I mean, he likes the classic stuff as much as he loves the modern stuff. Um, I think Ren and Stimpy, of course, and Beavis and Butthead and The Simpsons will be, not appropriate for 6 years old. Six, six. I think it's more of like a 13 and up kind of cartoon. But yeah, it's funny to know that like shows like South Park or The Simpsons or Ren and Stimpy, especially Ren and Stimpy, because it was made for kids. It was the way it was because of censors. There were censors trying to stop like all of these leaks happening on this boat, and unfortunately in that world you can't win them all, right? So it's almost like they were doing more gross stuff on purpose to distract from like the one or two gross jokes that did get through. It was almost like a compromise where like broadcast standards and practices was like, okay, you can't say this, you can't do that, you can't do that, but we'll let you do this, we'll let you do that, and that's it. Like, and that's kind of where your parents were probably like, don't watch that. And as a parent myself, you know again, I'd like to think that I turned out normal, but again, it's times have changed. The things that my kid is discovering on YouTube and watching, versus what was available to us back in the day, is way different. So yeah, I'm keeping a mindful eye.
I, sort of on a different topic though, but like in terms of industry practice, a critic asked me the other day why we don't consider films like Avatar or Black Panther animation, because we're seeing like more films, especially in like the bigger Marvel movies, etc., where actors are doing motion capture. They're so VFX heavy. Is this something that comes up in the series? Like, where does visual effects and animation begin now? Because it seems like
That's a very good. You could be working on the show on season 2. I think we'll call you for your ideas. Because that is a good question. I remember working at an animation studio where it was the same weekend as Spider-Man 3 with Tobey Maguire and Grand Theft Auto. I think Grand Theft Auto 5 came out. And that was like one of the very first weekends where we saw a video game make more money than a big blockbuster movie on a weekend. I remember the turns came in, like the results came in for Grand Theft Auto, and it was beyond what Spider-Man 3 made. Of course, Spider-Man 3 was the third one in the trilogy, maybe not the favorite one, and people were probably already done with it. But the fact that, that video game made more money than a movie was a big deal, and it was a turning point. It was like, wow, video games are better than movies now. We're getting to that point. It was at that point. And to your point, the actors involved who probably got paid only a couple hundred. I mean, think about this though. You're working on a video game for a year, you're getting paid over $100,000. That's not a bad paycheck. But if you think about it, this video game that you got paid $100,000 for is making almost $1 billion. You're thinking, where's my cut? You're thinking, I know I signed the contract, the ink is still fresh, give me my cut. There's no protection there for the performers. So where does, yeah, it's such a good question. Where does it end? What is the fine line between, because they're actors in those motion capture suits that are performing these characters. And there's probably a little bit of finessing with animation. They have to, it's not always going to be a perfect performance capture. Animators are involved. I think I'd love to live in a world where all the artists and all the creatives are taken care of, and are, compensated properly, especially if a game hits a certain tier of income, like how much it's made. Because they're not all winners at the same time. But the question is, yeah, like where is it animation and where is it like live action? It is such a fine line, and I think it's a pretty good question that could definitely be answered in a season 2.
Um, well, I definitely look forward to that season.
Yes.
And I know we're running out of time, so I just have one last question that I wanted to ask. One of your episodes features Domee, who
Yes.
had a hit this year with Turning Red. What was it like for you seeing Toronto figure so prominently in
Oh
animation?
man. Any time, as you could see on my hat, anytime I'm I think Mike Myers said it the best. It's like a Canadian is the most Canadian when he's not in Canada. So when you take a Canadian kid out of Canada, I won't stop talking about how proud I am to be a Canadian and to see Toronto represented, even just as a backdrop in something that is now injected into mainstream pop culture is amazing. I love the city, and it'll always be home to me. And the very fact that I'm talking with you now about a show that I have on the CBC is insane. I never thought in a million years that I would have my very own show on CBC's streaming channel, but here we are. And yeah, being from this city and this country is something that I'll always be proud of.
Great. Well, again, congrats on the show. And I
Thank
look
you.
forward to digging into the other episodes.
You'll have fun. I've also been watching them back because I haven't seen them since like we actually sat down and had the interviews. And I'm like, wow, okay. Like I always thought and wish that it could have been a bit longer, but the fact that they jammed all this stuff into 22 minutes is insane.
Yeah, they're pretty beefy
Kudos to the editors.
episodes. Great. Well, thanks for talking to me today, and
Thank you.
good luck with the heater.
Yeah, thank you so much.
And that's all, folks.
Thanks.
Take care.